One day my kids came home with some toys from their Happy Meals from McDonald's, and they were these Smurf Cottages with little Smurfs. So I started scuffing them up with a little sandpaper so that they could take paint. Then, of course, black bomb them. You could spray paint them, or you could just paint them by hand. I came up with this thatched roof concept, and I used dryer lint, which ended up being a real big mess. But I gave it a black wash, and then I painted it deep brown, and then I added some other things. For the timbers, I took popsicle sticks and I carved them up really well, using my patented technique for wood. And then I made this door out of foam core. Just carved it up, added a few little beads for adornments, and some texturing. Black bombed all those things. Here I experimented with adding some yellow to the thatched roof to maybe hopefully make it kind of look a little more like thatching. That didn't work. It kind of just looked like I blew a load of mustard all over it. Then for the exterior, for the brick pattern, I tried to do a stamp. So I made a stamp, and I stamped it on. And at first I thought it was kind of okay, but I realized that there wasn't enough space between the bricks, so I kind of scored it more. And I tried a couple different colors, and in the end I just didn't like it. I started hot gluing the timbers on and the door, and I still didn't like the way that the stamping looked, so I decided to fill it in. So then I used my hot glue gun and smeared it around to make it kind of more like a stucco look between the timbers, which ended up working out a lot better. I added some touch-ups on it. Well, there's the original, and there's the finished version of my first Smurf cottage. So still not really happy with how that thatching turned out. I might hit it with some brown later, maybe a brown wash, because right now it just kind of looks like a cat threw up on it. But the rest of the building I'm pretty okay with. But I knew that I wanted to try something else, something a little different. So in the next version, I decided I'd go with more of a stone cottage. So I started by just rough cutting out and peeling off the backing from some foam core, cut them down to smaller sizes to make them a little more manageable for this project. And I keep the scraps. Then, using your rolled up aluminum foil, texturize it. So tried to give it kind of a stony texture, which comes out pretty well there. And then I started scoring it and cutting out bricks. So the bricks were all kinds of different sizes. I had some bricks that were more rectangular, some that were more square. I had fatter bricks and smaller bricks. And basically I just wanted it to kind of look irregular, because I'm thinking these are small cottages, probably owned by peasants or serfs, and they don't have, tons of money for perfect bricks, so they probably did a lot of the stonework themselves. And then you just start the process of hot gluing them on. I learned from previous projects, some of the towers and things that I did, to put the bigger bricks on the bottom. I think that's actually more architecturally correct. They had the larger kind of foundation bricks on the bottom and then smaller ones working around. And of course, sometimes throughout this process, I would run into situations where I had, gaps, and I had to cut smaller custom bricks or shave a brick down. I did a real heavy black wash across the bricks to fill in the gaps especially, and I even painted black on the inside of the cottage. Then I did a pewter gray, kind of a dry brush, but not super light, just, heavy enough to make sure that the gray was there. The little chimney that was actually part of the Smurf cottage, just lightly painting gray across it really filled it in and made that stone come to life, but still maintained the black in the cracks, which was nice. The roof I did black, and then I did an overbrush of red, and then I put some brown on there. And I painted in the thatching on the little window on the roof, so that kind of gave it a little more texture. For the highlights on the brick, I used a real light dry brush of granite gray, just to kind of bring out some of the details there. And I even did a little dry brush along the edging of that chimney to kind of give it a little more dimensionality. So I went to kind of each of the four corners and then along the top. Not too heavy though. I want to make sure that deeper gray is underneath. The nutmeg brown kind of warm up the color palette on the roof a little bit more, so I'm happy with how that turned out. That's kind of a light dry brushing across the top there. So And then I went back with that same lighter brown to do the interior window timbers, which were already part of the Smurf cottage, but when you add in that brown, and don't overdo it, just do enough to make sure that you convey that it's wood. The window covering was just burlap. It was a chunk of burlap that I literally found in my backyard, but I thought it looked pretty good. I wanted to add some green to make it kind of look like moss, so I kind of hit corners like underneath the window and around the thatching, just areas that I thought maybe would be in the shade, and maybe in the corners where you'd have moss maybe growing during damper seasons, and kind of went along the bottom of the cottage maybe to show where the moss would grow up from the damp ground, just to give it a little more dimensionality. So there's the second cottage in all of its close-up glory. And those of you with an astute eye for detail will notice that I screwed up and didn't put a door. I realized that about halfway through. I was like, oh, hey, this cottage has no door. I'm an idiot. But you know what? It doesn't really matter. I'm still going to put it on the table. Players will care or they won't care. But, when you're thinking about terrain that you craft, I try to remember the fact that for like 30 years I played D&D with no terrain at all. So any terrain basically is good terrain. So these are 2 of the 4 cottages that I have. Here's some minis in here for scale, and I think it looks pretty good. And I actually have played with these on the table, and they do add a little something different. It's nice to have some variety. So I'm happy with how they turned out. That's Smurf Cottages. Hope you get a chance to try out your own, and thanks for subscribing.